A good Erev Shabbos. A few years ago, you may recall, there was a movie called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, about a man who aged in reverse. He started out as an old man, and as time went by, he got younger, better looking, until he turned into Brad Pitt. Then he became a teenager, then a kid, and ultimately a baby. This film was actually based on a short story from 1922 written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The comedian George Carlin once had a bit on this also, what life would be like if we went in that direction instead of the natural progression that we all experience. He said, "It's the most unfair thing. Life is long, takes up a lot of your time," he said. "And what do you get at the end? Death. What is that, a bonus?" He said, "It should really be the other way. You should die first, get that out of the way. Then you go into a retirement home. Then you get kicked out for being too young. Then they give you a gold watch, and you work for 40 years until you're young enough to enjoy retirement." Goes on from there. And I think you can hear the logic. Sounds attractive. Someone, actually, Jewish fellow who recently won a Nobel Prize in Literature, once wrote in a piece entitled My Back Pages the words, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. In our Parsha this week, Chayei Sarah, we have an indicator from the get-go that things are going to be a little different, a little more out of order than we might have thought. First of all, Chayei Sarah means the life of Sarah. And in the second verse, Sarah passes away, she dies. At the beginning of the Parsha, there's death, mourning, grief, eulogy, burial. Then moving on to the next topic, right away we get shidduchim. A shidduch, finding a fitting life partner to marry, everything that goes with that. And then success, marriage ensues. But wait, there's more. What comes after that? Love comes after that. Once the young couple gets married and begins to set up their home together, then love. Isn't it normally the other way around? Or so we're accustomed to think. Then what's next? Remarriage. For Avraham, whose wife passed away at the beginning of the Parsha, he now has another chapter of his life at the end of the Sedra when he remarries. His new wife, or we might say his Altnoi wife, Keturah, as it emerges, they had children and perhaps even grandchildren, it seems. So the very last part of Avraham's life before he expired involved marriage and children. The Parsha is as if you took the normal life cycle and cut it up into pieces and tossed them in the air. Let the pieces land where they may. Everything's out of order and a little bit of a surprise. That may give us some insight into the blessing that's given to Rivka in the middle of the Parsha at her wedding. In the fifth Aliyah, when the wedding's about to take place, Rivka's siblings give her a bracha, a blessing. They say, Achosenu at hayi la'alfe revava. Our sister, may you come to be the mother of thousands of 10,000s. V'yirash zarech es shar sinav. May your progeny inherit the gates of its foes. This blessing, at least the first part, is customarily given even nowadays to brides at their bedeken, when the veil is placed on their face just before the chuppah. What's going on with this blessing? Of course, having children is an infinite project. We are here because long, long, long ago, our ancestors had children, who had children, who had children, and so on, who survived, thankfully, and thrived, hopefully, and had us, and here we are. What happens next is really only minimally up to us. We do our best. Some are blessed with children, others receive different blessings, and somehow or other, Am Yisrael Chai, the people continues as it always has and always will. A few years ago, a woman passed away in New York. She was part of the Satmar community. She was a Holocaust survivor, and her many children produced over 200 grandchildren. And the total number of direct descendants she had when she passed away, well into her 90s, her great-grandchildren even more, was 2,000, according to some reports, 2,500, according to others. You can see in another generation or two where that's headed. So it's not impossible at all. Then again, there's Fleische dicke Kinder and Ruchnias dicke Kinder. Those of us who are blessed with flesh and blood, actual children, it's one thing. but the spiritual children, those whom we influence, or we mentor, or we teach, or we befriend, is another story altogether. When we support Jewish schools, Jewish institutions, enable them to accept and to educate more students now and into the future, that's truly a glimpse of the thousands of the 10,000s, a look into infinity. One way to take part in this amazing process is to live in the model of Avraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham himself. This week's parsha tells us that God blessed Avraham with everything, Bakol. Others say that means God blessed Avraham with a daughter named Bakol. That also could be. But before that, it says Vavram Zaken Ba Bayamim. It says in the second Aliyah, Avram was old, advanced in years, as the Art Scroll translates. Avram was old and full of years. Others render it getting on in years, stricken with age. Thanks, King James. Puts a pretty fine point on it. But maybe Ba Bayamim doesn't just tell how old he was. Maybe it tells us also something about how he got there. Avraham came with days. He arrived ready and enthusiastic for each and every day. Who knew what was to come? Who knew what opportunities would present themselves for mitzvot, for welcoming guests, for dancing at his kid's wedding, that same kid that he thought would die up on Mount Moriah, for finding a new relationship at the end of his life, and even more children. As distinct from those whose life ends years or even decades before the Levaya and the burial, Avraham was ready to live each day anew, looking forward. He was not one to just phone it in or punch the clock. No drudge. He was truly Ba Bayamim. He came with his days, ready and eager for each one. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Just before the chuppah of Yitzchak and Rivka that we mentioned, we learn from the groom, from the chassan, from Yitzchak, about davening mincha. Verse 63 in chapter 24 starts out telling us that Yitzchak went out to the fields to supplicate, to daven, to speak to God towards evening, which means it was late afternoon. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basada lifnos erev. Gemara in Brachas, which some of us learned in the last few years, explains that we learn how and when to daven from the example of our ancestors. At other moments in this book of Genesis, we have an example of Avraham davening in the morning, from which we learned that we should daven Shacharis, and Yaakov davening at night, actually encountering God just before he went to sleep and had that dream about the angels descending and ascending the ladder. That's the basis for Mariv, the evening prayer, at least according to one opinion. There's always more than one opinion. Perhaps it could be that the services that we pray every day are patterned after the models of our ancestors. Then again, perhaps they're patterned after the model of the daily offerings in the temple, which was first the Mishkan, of course, the portable sanctuary in the desert. Each Rosh Chodesh we read from Parshas Pinchas the words of the daily sacrifices. Sakeves achad taseh vaboker v'sakeves hasheni taseh ben harbayim. One shepsela we offer in the morning and one shepsela in the afternoon. Maybe that's the precedent for a morning offering of prayer and an afternoon offering of prayer, since we don't do sacrifices now. And in those days, any leftover offerings, anything was left over from the course of the day, would be offered at night. That's how Mariv came to be, according to this view, anyway. But since Mincha, the afternoon service, features in our portion of the week, let's think about that for a moment. Mincha is the perfect service. It's the shortest by far. All it is Ashrei, which is mostly Psalm 145, an Amida, maybe Tachanun, maybe not, and Aleinu, 10 minutes maybe. And the timing, can we talk about the timing? Could not be better. It's never too early, never too late. Our morning services at Kehillat Shari Torah are probably too early for most people, which is why we tend to have a smaller group than on Shabbat. Thanks to a number of people's efforts and a WhatsApp, we have a very reliable minyan, Ken Ayin Hara. 4 of those regular attendees, by the way, have left town this week. So if you ever thought it was a good time to help out with the daily minyan, this is the week to do it. Anyway, 7 a.m. is a real commitment, and it's worth mentioning that those who come are there and ready on time, ready to start at 7. We're not waiting for anyone. If it were much later, those who work would not be able to come. Once the announcement was made at a different shul in Toronto. They had a lot of people, and they had 3 morning minyanim during the weekdays. And the times were something like 7:10 and 7:20 and 7:27 for the 3 minyanim, something like that. See, it's not easy to get people to agree, even on a time for a minyan for Shacharis. Mariv is a commitment of its own. Usually it's marketed as a package, a Mincha Mariv package for those who are saying Kaddish. That is it's supposed to be after dark, but it can be flexible, as we do here at KST, particularly in the summers. Since that question of the flexibility of the prayer times has come up a few times recently, let's just mention a little bit about davening times vis-a-vis the times of the day. Shacharit, as we learned in that Gemara in Brachas, has to be said in the first third of the day, and Shema in the first quarter of the day. Now, a day, for purposes of prayer in halacha, in Jewish law, means the time from sun up to sunset. We take that time block and we slice it into 12 portions, and we call those halachic hours, sha'os zmanios. At the 2 equinoxes of the year, fall and spring, when it's about 12 clock hours, 12 hours on the clock, from sun up until sundown, then a halachic hour is about 60 minutes on the clock. This Shabbos, when the sun rises at 7:23 in the morning and sets at 4:45, it's a much shorter time of a day. If you slice that period into 12 portions, a shazmanit, a halachic hour, is 46 minutes on the clock, on your watch. Of course, the inverse is the case in winter, in summer rather, when sunset is 9:15 at night. Shabbos only ends at 10 o'clock when it gets dark. In the summertime, a halachic hour is about 75 or 76 minutes on the clock. So the time for davening mincha, back to our Gemara, is half a halachic hour past midday. Midday means the midpoint between sunup and sundown. This Shabbos, that's 12:04, going by the old clock on the wall. Add a half a halachic hour, half of 46, 23, which means our earliest time to daven mincha this Shabbos is 12:27, which we'll probably do. We'll come pretty close, depending on how exciting the Kiddush is. And there's an interesting conversation for another time about when you can daven Mariv. In very brief, there's an interval in the late afternoon, which you can designate for yourself as either day or night, and daven either a late mincha or an early Mariv in that time, not both. If you daven late mincha, then you have to wait until nighttime for Mariv. But if you already daven mincha before that time, you can daven an early Mariv. You just have to repeat the Shema later, because the Shema is always said at night. But that's for another time. Let's just say that if you're looking to focus on your davening repertoire, mincha might be a great complement to add to your toolkit. It's very short, because the Torah recognizes that we have a lot of things to accomplish in the course of our day, particularly when the days are short and there's not much time in the afternoon before sunset. It's not always so easy to take time out of the workday and dedicate a few minutes to prayer, especially focused and devoted prayer, to really enter into it and do what you're doing, say what you're saying, mean what you're saying. Nevertheless, when you're in a community where there's enough Jews who want to commit to gathering for mincha every day, either because people are saying Kaddish and others want to support that, or simply because it's good to daven with a minyan every day, then you'll have a list of minyanim that meet in the business districts, whether that's Bay Street or Wall Street or Midtown Manhattan or many other places around the world. An app called GoDaven, a website called GoDaven, helps you find them. The Gemara says that a person should be very careful with mincha, because mincha is the time that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, was answered. In 1 Kings, Eliyahu davened at the same time that the Karban Mincha, the afternoon offering, was brought, and he was answered. We learn from this that the timing is important. There may well be other things on our calendar, and yet it's important to take a few minutes out of the day and speak to God. Rabbi Sachs, whose yahrzeit we marked earlier this week, said that when we study Torah, God is talking to us. When we pray, we are talking to God. Hopefully, everyone is listening. A mincha really means a gift, and the mincha prayer is just that. When we do take a few minutes from all the other commitments and obligations of the day, and we dedicate our hearts and minds and that time just for a few minutes to God, that is a very precious gift that we give. We can look at it in the other way too. We might mistakenly think that after I daven in the morning, I'm on my own. I'm all alone in the world until nighttime when I talk to God again. No, as it happens, there's a beautiful and invaluable gift waiting for us right in the middle of the afternoon, each and every day. Mincha, a gift from ourselves and a gift to ourselves, maybe, where we dedicate and sanctify a brief moment in time. And in turn, our day is elevated and transformed, and we know that we're never alone. Shabbat Shalom.